All right. Well, we better get started with the podcast. I just want to make sure. Are you feeling okay? You don't look quite right.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of,
Ah! What
yeah,
happened?
uh, it was another dispute over a checkers game.
Again,
And yeah, you know how that happens. I
I
mean,
know how it happens with you.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess I play a lot of checkers or get really involved in the game or something. But uh,
Yeah, hanging out with a lot of tough customers down at the old Checkers Center. I don't
yeah,
even know where people play checkers, but yeah.
a board game cafe.
Oh,
Yeah,
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 very, very edgy, very tough
right.
guy. So, well, tell me the story. What actually happened?
Oh, I can't really get into it. I mean, I would love to tell you the full story, but it would probably take like 13 books in order to explain the whole story.
All right, yeah, we'll put that on pause for now.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Oh, oh, keep the hands lowered, please. Hello and welcome to Woeful Wednesdays. Nathan reads a series of unfortunate events. Ignore the tattoo. My name is Nathan.
And I'm Tyler.
And if you are new to this, we are reading through all of the books in a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, really written by Daniel Handler. And we're doing 3 videos for each book, posting weekly videos. So we are looking at chapters 1 to 4, 5 to 8, and then 9 to 13. And specifically for this week, we are looking at the Penultimate Peril, book the 12th, chapters 9 to 13. We are almost at the end of the series.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. It feels good to have gotten through another one of these books. Um, yeah, moving right toward the end, as is the title of the next book. But we have to talk about the end of this one first, and in order to do that, we should get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Now we do have a sponsor, and I should add before I get into the ad read for this week that you have read the series before
Ah,
multiple
yes.
times, including as a middle grade reader, and I am reading through the series for a first time, for
Hmm.
the very first time. But we do have a sponsor. So our sponsor for this week's podcast is Carmelita's Flying Boats. The ride is slightly better than burning to death on the roof of a hotel. Powered by gravity, slowed by Captain Sham's drag chute, Carmelita's Flying Boats surf the air currents, brah.
Yes, no, that sounds great. Man, I have to get me one of those. That sounds like a perfect, item to have. Who doesn't want to go sailing off the edge of their roof?
Exactly. I mean, I can't imagine that there's going to be any lawsuits at all because
Yeah,
essentially this product you take it to the roof of a very tall building and then get on it and then just push yourself off the edge.
yeah, yeah. What could possibly go wrong?
Right. Right. A lot of good ideas for middle grade readers here.
Absolutely.
All right, folks, I hope you enjoy. Ignore the tattoo! Nathan unfortunately reads a series of unfortunate events at an unfortunate age, which in this case is being used to indicate that he is entirely too old to be reading this for the first time. All right, so we are looking at chapters 9 to 13 in book the 12th, The Penultimate Peril. Now, I have got plot summary duty for this week. So, we were talking off air there about what happens here because you've got like 150 pages in these chapters. And I'm thinking about the plot summary and I'm going, I sure don't feel like I've got much to say, even though we've got such a big amount of pages compared to many of the books in the series. And
Yeah,
as you pointed out, there's a lot of details here, but not a lot of actual plot.
yeah, yeah. Not a lot of story beats exactly. So yeah, it's
Right. So ultimately, what happens is where we left off at the end of chapter 8, and it picks up right where we left off at the end of chapter 8 with chapter 9, is the Baudelaires, they've just met Dewey Denouement, and they're
Mhm.
coming back into the hotel, into the lobby of the hotel. They were out there with, who else was out there? There's also um,
Justice
Jerome
Strauss.
Squaller, yeah, Justice
Yeah.
Strauss and Jerome Squaller and Dewey Denouement, and they come back in, and then Olaf is there in the lobby. Bum, bum, bum. Oh no. And there's all of this squabbling, and then Esme's there, and then Carmelita shows up, and through a whole back and forth between the two of them, because he's threatening to shoot, you know, Ernest, Frank, Dewey, whoever, right?
Right.
And then the Baudelaires kind of wrestle the harpoon gun away, and ultimately it goes off, as we were told in chapter 9, that there's going to be a gunshot and somebody's going to die, and Dewey Denouement dies. And
Yeah.
then they've got all of this guilt. It's like, what do we do? What do we do? And then Justice Strauss has got the solution of, we're going to put you all on trial with the high court.
Yeah. Well, I guess that was kind of the plan all
Yeah,
along, but it's just been accelerated with the death of Dewey Denouement, because who knows what would be able to happen in another 24 hours.
right.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so then to keep the Baudelaires safe-ish, they put them in the closet where there was the harpoon gun, where Violet initially found this. And then they are then told that, and of course you have the death of Dewey and all of that. They go out there, they're, terribly upset because he goes out to the pond and kind of sinks
Mhm.
down. All of the guests of the hotel are,
And
go
and
ahead.
there is the taxi cab which shows up and offers to take them away, which
Right.
they end up not doing, not
Yeah, they
taking
and
up that
it's a
opportunity.
very strange moment there. That
Hmm.
entire thing with the taxi cab and the mysterious driver, and
Yeah,
Snicket is saying, "I don't know whether it would have been good for them or not, and I know all of these things," and he tells us all kinds of things, and he's like, "But I don't know whether it was a good idea or not."
yeah,
So,
yeah. I guess this is as good a point as any to just step in and say the the theories when the books came out stated that that was likely Lemony Snicket himself who had shown up, and
okay.
so that's why he knows everything about himself, but constantly being, self-deprecating. Then he's like, I don't know if it would have been better or not. Like, who knows? I'm in a whole heap of trouble as well. Um, and that was more or less confirmed by the Netflix series.
Right.
So,
No, that makes sense. That it does make sense.
yeah.
So anyway, they get locked in this closet. They are then told that because Justice is blind, they have to wear blindfolds.
Yep.
So, and along with everybody else in the courtroom, but not the judges.
Right.
So there's Justice Strauss and then two other judges, and she has known them all along. They're very good friends of hers, and very trustworthy people, et cetera, saying, "Don't worry, Baudelaire's. This is not going to be a problem." So they end up going on trial. Olaf insists that he is completely innocent. The Baudelaires wrestle with this idea of, are we innocent or not, and ultimately go for this idea of, sure, we're innocent. And Justice Strauss,
Comparatively.
yeah, comparatively innocent. And then Strauss is seemingly in agreement. And then the start sounding a little bit off, and they're getting a little concerned. So the Baudelaires, at the risk of getting in huge trouble, being contempt of court, they take off the blindfolds to find the man with a beard and no hair, and the woman with hair but no beard are the other judges, the other justices, who have now taken like between Olaf and them, then they've got Justice Strauss. They have essentially kidnapped her. The kids encourage everybody else to try to take off their blindfolds, and people are reluctant to do so. They go down to the laundry room with the vernacular something device,
Yeah.
fastening.
Vernac vernacularly fastened door. Yeah.
Yes, vernacularly fastened door. They get into the laundry room. Klaus is just like, "Oh, here's all the solutions to it. Who cares? Like, what difference does it make anyway?"
Hmm.
And opens up the door for Olaf because he believes that the sugar bowl is in there. The sugar bowl is not in there. And then Sonny's like, "Hey, let's just burn the place to the ground."
Yeah.
And then they start a fire, and then they do the whole elevator trick. Let's push all the buttons. So then we stop on every floor because Olaf wants to take the elevator back up to the roof to go and get the medusoid mycelium mushroom and release it in the hotel, so then everybody will get sick. And he didn't even think about burning the place to the ground, but he's happy enough with this idea. And
Hmm.
then they just warn everybody along the way, "Fire, fire, get out of the hotel." get up to the roof, get on a boat, jump off of the roof with the drag chutes, and now they're with Olaf sailing away.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that about does it. And everyone in the hotel who refuses to leave is presumably, as well as Justice Strauss falling to her death off of the roof of the building.
Yep.
So, yep. um, yeah. I think that does about cover it. Do you? So we'll get into our notes here. I did have a couple of quick things to say before we get into it. The first is uh, at the very beginning of chapter one, then we do get a little bit uh, of a tease or what have you toward how everything is going to play out. Where he's, talking about the ripples in a pond. The ripples will spread across the surface of the pond, and the world will change for the better with one less dreadful story for people to read and one more secret hidden at the bottom of a pond where most people never think of looking. And so, of course, that's where Dewey Denouement ends up. That's where the sugar bowl had ended up. And yeah, so it is. I like the fact that, there's a little bit of that foreshadowing on the very first page.
Yes, there is. It is fairly well done.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's got so many non sequiturs in
Yeah.
these books that you never know if something actually has significance,
Yeah.
and so then in that case, then it actually does, and it does work well.
Mm-hmm. All right. Did you want to go first for chapter 9 or shall I?
I guess I'll go first. So this is on page 208. Then it's towards the top of the page, and it's Olaf who's speaking here, and he says, "Silence, bookworm." Olaf ordered, "Children should not speak while adults are arguing. Hand over the orphans, adults." And it's a funny little thing of adults being rude and children are being polite, and the kids. I mean, it's a reiteration of this theme that you have throughout the books, right? That children should not speak while adults are arguing.
Yeah.
Right? It's that children are speaking, adults are arguing. Well, one of those shouldn't be happening at all, but then he's correcting them, even though they are being polite and civilized, and he is being, uncivilized and impolite. That
Absolutely.
it's just another example of the Baudelaires are. They're perfect, and kids are perfect. Aside from Carmelita, we do have a bad kid with her, but for the
Yes.
most part, then children in this story universe are like cannot do anything wrong, and the adults are all awful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, absolutely.
All right, page 211. Then this is towards the top of the page. I guess it's the third paragraph down. This is Olaf who's speaking again, and he says, "And how did you survive me?" Olaf asked. "The daily punctilio is full of your crimes. You lied to people, you stole, you abandoned people in danger, you set fires. Time after time, you've relied on treachery to survive, just like everyone else. There are no truly noble people in this world. Our parents," Sonny said fiercely, and then it goes on from there. But essentially, he's arguing if you have ever done anything wrong at all, then you're not, you cannot consider yourself noble. And
Yeah. At least not truly noble.
not truly noble. Like, again, this word noble that is really meaningless.
Yeah.
It's such a vague word to be using, but this idea of being a noble person, being truly noble, seems to be the epitome of being a good person. That's how you can measure whether you are noble or a villain. And
Mm-hmm.
those seem to be the only two possibilities in this world. You're either noble or you're a villain. And as much as Snicket is occasionally trying to create shades of gray in the morality, he
Mm-hmm.
comes back to this binary worldview again and again and again. And it's
Yeah.
this idea that if you can't be perfect, then you somehow have failed as a human being. There's really no acceptance of just, well, I'm a person, so I make mistakes,
Right.
and I learn from my mistakes and I try not to repeat them. That seems like, to me, generally speaking, the consensus is that would be the measure of being a good person.
Right.
Not so much perfection, but just if you're striving to get better and you don't insist when you do something wrong that it was actually good.
Right. Yeah, and I think I think that's why that line from the last set of chapters that we read, or that sequence, uh, stood out to me of "You are noble enough," because in a world where everything is apparently about either being noble or being villainous, then somebody telling you you are noble enough is, you know, in this world would be the most, you know, impactful thing, I suppose.
Yeah. Um, I guess I see what he's doing here. I don't have much interest in this idea when he
Mhm.
gets into this kind of, I don't know, worldview, I guess,
Right.
that we need to use that as our barometer of a person,
Right.
this vague measurement of nobility. And the other thing that I just wanted to briefly mention with this, of this idea that you need to be, he says, there are no truly noble people in this world, right? That you've done all of these things to survive just like everyone else. And um, it's just an interesting thing in this story universe where he completely denies religion and the like it doesn't exist. Then it's like, at least according to a Christian worldview, there is only one person who has ever lived who has lived a sin-free life, and
Hmm.
it's in order to then um, sacrifice his life, which atones for the sins of all of mankind, which then offers belief in him, offers salvation. But that since no one has lived a sin free life, no one is capable of living a sin free life except for the Son of God, Jesus, who is capable and who actually does this because he lives a sin free life for us, then that is essentially how salvation is offered to people who do have sin, who
Right.
do, fall short of the glory of God, right? Like,
Yep.
according to scripture. So I'm saying he's basically presenting this worldview of saying there are no truly noble people in this world. And it's like, well, yeah, but the Christian worldview would say, except there's been one. And
Right.
that actually relates specifically to this whole idea that you don't need to be good enough to get into heaven. You just need to believe in Jesus, who ultimately has paid the price for your sins, that no matter what sins you have, that his death for you, his sacrifice for you, covers that,
Yeah.
right? That it atones for your sins. So I don't know. That's where it feels like he's trying to play philosopher, and I guess not theologian, but play philosopher and ideologue with both hands tied behind his back, where
Right.
he's pretending that all these things just don't exist. All of these other answers, whether you agree with that as an answer or not, but it's like he denies a Jewish worldview, he denies a Muslim worldview, an Islamic worldview, he denies a Christian worldview, a Buddhist worldview, he denies a Hindu worldview. All of the major religions and minor religions of the world, they don't exist at all of these other philosophies don't exist at all these other ideologies don't exist at all. And then the entire series seems to be set up as in terms of the morality of it, as a straw man argument where he's setting up this thing and saying, here are your options: villainy or nobility.
Yeah.
And it's saying, yeah, people throughout time and throughout various cultures and various religions have come up with a lot of other possibilities besides those two, but you've now reduced it into those two things, and intentionally being ignorant about every other perspective on this. You're
Right.
providing us with one perspective and you're denying us all the other perspectives. And to me, it's frustrating.
Yeah. 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 No, that's totally fair.
Because he's got a lot to say in these chapters, and really am not interested in what he has to say because it just feels unfair.
Right. Yeah.
Right. It's essentially going on trial about the goodness of a human being. How can you measure the goodness of a human being? Then saying you can't present any religious arguments, you can't present any philosophies, and you can't present any ideologies. You can only talk about it in terms of you are either purely villainous or purely noble. Those are your
Right.
two options. And it's going, well, that's not a fair trial. Then you're not
Yeah.
being fair. You're ignoring, you know, just
And
go ahead.
yeah, there's no sense of intention either. It's all about what events have occurred and who is to blame for them.
Right.
Uh, there's no talk of intentions,
Right.
um,
I
which
know.
that is a huge thing in the legal system, at least most legal systems,
Yes.
is intention to
Intent
harm
does
or
matter.
yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. I totally agree. When I was reading through these chapters, I was thinking that the entire time I was going, okay, you're denying intent. And that's the
hmm
problem is I feel like he keeps it's almost it's not reductio ad absurdum, but it's because he's not trying to be silly. He's trying it's like reductio ad profundio, right? That he's
Right.
trying to be profound by reducing it to two ridiculous choices. And it's going, yeah, you won't even consider intent with
Right.
them. Like Olaf saying this to the kids, and the kids wrestling with these questions of, oh, we dropped a match at the circus, and therefore we are guilty of setting fires. Like, what was your intention? Like, what were
hmm
the circumstances? All of
Yeah.
these things factor in. And if you're going to pretend like that doesn't factor in, then I'm like, oh, you're an idiot. I don't want to talk to you then. Because
Right.
like that's just basically the response of you're going to make it this simplistic. It feels so two-dimensional, so much like the morality in this story universe is so two-dimensional,
hmm
and it's binary and uninteresting to me.
Yeah, I think it's interesting the way that it is done, where it seems like Justice Strauss is interested in what their intentions were to some degree,
Yeah.
but that the other two, justices, and they are not interested in it, which, you know, it makes sense because they are villainous. And so you can almost see it that way, where it's like the villains aren't concerned with intent, um, but that basically, in order to reduce everyone to their level, then they say intent doesn't matter.
Right.
Um, and then if think about it in terms of like, well, but the protagonists do care about intent. They're just being questioned about it constantly to the point where they are questioning it themselves. So it's like it almost feels like he is presenting it as, you know, you should consider intent, but nobody in this world does.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah,
it's like
maybe. Yeah.
that's like a noble trait, uh, is to look at intent rather than just actions, but that it's just
It's just it
they are.
seems so incredibly it's so patently obvious that
Mhm.
and the fact that that gets denied, if that is the lesson that's ultimately supposed to be um you know like emphasized to the reader, then I'm like, yeah, but you basically it's something that kids know. You're pretending that it doesn't exist for 12, 13 books, and now you're reintroducing it saying, so intentions actually matter when it comes to your behavior. And it's like you could have asked a kid that to begin with, and they would have given you a good answer.
Yeah, that's interesting because I was just thinking about that, and I don't know, like I feel like that could be helpful for children who are questioning, you know, for example, like why one sibling is being treated one way when they're doing the same thing in their eyes, and be treated differently. That it's, well, you had a different intention behind what you were doing, and that is an explanation for why you're being treated differently. but it's not.
Yeah, no, you might be right.
Yeah, I feel like there's not quite enough there to make that lesson really hit home for kids, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
because then they do literally compare themselves to Olaf, and I know I'm jumping ahead, but I guess since we're on this topic, they literally, when it's determining whether they're considering the question because it's are you guilty or innocent, and there's no charges being read to them.
Hmm.
It's just are you guilty or innocent, and then they have to consider what does that question mean and how do we respond to it. And because Olaf has already said that he's innocent, then it's sort of they look at him, they're like, oh, well, we're comparatively innocent like
Yeah.
compared to him. And it's like that's the most ridiculous solution possible to compare yourself to somebody else to determine whether you're a good person or not.
Hmm.
No, there is no um, philosopher, ideology, religion that ever says that that's a good thing. Compare yourself to other people and measure yourself according to that standard.
Right. Yeah. No, even 'cause I'm thinking about, like, well, they're not Hitler. And it's like, yeah, but that's not really saying much, is it?
That's the thing,
And
is
that's,
it
yeah.
that's never, and that's not how the justice system works at all.
No. See, they didn't commit genocide, so therefore they're completely innocent. We're not talking about that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we don't compare to other people. It's criterion referenced, as in you have the legal criteria of
Right.
this is the standard. You are evaluated, you're judged against that standard,
Hmm.
not against other people.
Yeah.
And anyway,
Yeah.
it feels like
The
he's being unfair.
Yeah. The other note that I will say about this, and again, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but Sonny says Scalia, which
Yes.
is a reference to Antonin's Scalia,
Hmm.
correct? And I guess he has often been criticized by certain people
Hmm.
for, staying true to to the word of the
The
law.
to the Constitution. Yes.
Yes. And there's definitely some of that in this whole trial sequence as well, where, justice is blind, which means that, everybody needs to be blindfolded. And it's like, yeah, but that's not what that meant. So I think
Right.
that we had talked about, Handler's political bias before, and it certainly seems like that this is another example of him being like, see how ridiculous it is to go by the words in the Constitution.
Right.
Um,
Uh,
and so I think that plays a part here too, where it's if you're just going based on what is written in law as this is illegal and this is legal,
mhm.
then it does become this reductio ad absurdum, where it's well then intent doesn't matter because this person murdered that person, and so then they are therefore guilty. It doesn't matter what their intent was. So I think that he's doing that, and yeah.
Yes, I think you're right. I think that he is doing that. That's definitely part of what's going on here. And you are right about Scalia, who's since passed away, and now it's because he was, of course, one of the justices on the Supreme Court in the United States. And then
Yes.
I think is it Gorsuch or no, it wasn't Gorsuch. It's Kavanaugh, I believe, who got Scalia's
Mm.
position. I might be getting mixed up here, but I'm pretty sure it's Kavanaugh who took over his position on the Supreme Court. But yeah, Scalia was a very conservative justice, and he believed
Yes.
because the Supreme Court is split between liberals and conservatives, and essentially liberal justices and the political left in the United States believes that the Constitution is a living document that changes with culture and with time. And conservatives believe that you have to abide by the standard set out by the founding fathers as outlined in the Constitution because it remains consistent. And so it doesn't matter with public sentiment and the way the whims of the public shift, and
Yeah.
they'll oscillate, to the right and to the left, to the right and to the left. They oscillate, and that if you're basically, if you treat it more as a living document, it can very quickly turn into chaos, because everything becomes, well, we believe that, well, right now, this is what the consensus is in the population. And then it ends up being tyranny of the masses, essentially. So this is the political theory, is that, well, if you have 50% plus of people in the country who believe this particular thing should be legal or illegal, and forget about what the Constitution says, then laws are just going to change so quickly that you're going to have chaos within your country.
Right.
But instead, if you make it much more difficult to change things, and then you say, well, we've had the standard that, doesn't change based off of enough outrage in the public. Basically, the only way that you can change the Constitution if you feel like something is actually wrong is you have to do a constitutional amendment, which you then have to go through Congress to get, and that's very challenging to do. And so they made it intentionally difficult. It's not that you can't change the Constitution, it's just it's very difficult to change it. And so, but that's basically what you are right, because he is, in that case, it is reductio ad absurdum. It's saying if you're always taking everything literally, but the idea that, well, justice is blind, so therefore people should be blindfolded, it's reductio ad absurdum. It's like, that's not what it means. And that's certainly not what somebody who is a conservative constitutionalist, who is an originalist, is the proper term for it, where they believe in the original construction of the Constitution, that person who believes in that particular approach to the Constitution, that they are somehow ridiculous in how they interpret it.
Right.
But it's again, I feel like I say this all the time to my students, because when I'm teaching rhetoric, then I tell them that when it comes to debate and understanding complex issues, if you want to engage in any kind of debate, any kind of discourse where you want to interact with somebody and you don't necessarily agree with them, you have to genuinely do your best to understand their position. That's the only way to effectively argue. That if you intentionally misunderstand their argument and you continually twist it and subvert what they're saying, and you repeat it back but in a twisted way, and you don't even try to understand what the other person, what their position is, then you're never going to have any kind of healthy discourse.
Absolutely.
And that's what it feels like.
Right.
He's making it sound so ridiculous, and it's like, that's not what that's not how morality works. That you're making this sound so stupid, and people who have a different worldview from you don't have this ridiculous. Nobody has this worldview.
Right.
No one. And so that's the frustrating thing. Anyway, I feel like I've mostly, that's a lot of my notes for for the book, for these chapters. I've only got one other with chapter 9. I guess I might as well go over it.
Yeah, for sure. And just this whole discussion has reminded me of that one gag. I think it's from Family Guy, where it's like, oh, do you think people will, like, it's the founding fathers who are writing the Constitution.
Yes, I know this gag, like,
oh, do you think, people will understand what we mean? How could anybody misinterpret the right to bear arms? And it's bear are like the arms of an animal hanging on the wall.
Right.
Yeah. So it's like, if you're looking at just the actual words, then
yes, exactly. That's the thing. I mean, like, I could get all deep into that discussion, and that little reference to Scalia and the literal interpretation of the law, it's absolutely a dig at conservatives, which I don't have a problem with, but it's like you can critique conservatives, you can critique liberals, but critique them for what they actually believe. Don't
Yeah.
critique them for something they don't actually believe, because
Right.
that's just it's an unethical way of arguing, and ultimately everybody loses. It
Yeah.
turns into basically exactly what society looks like right now.
Right. Yes. And as well, then it's just this it don't make it the subject of an entire third of your book.
Yeah. I
Because
yeah.
again, if somebody does take issue with the way that you're portraying it, then they're going to take issue with a significant part of at least one of your books.
Absolutely, and especially when it doesn't. There's so much. I've said it before that it feels like what Handler's doing. It's a Trojan horse. He's
Hmm.
cloaking a lot of these ideas in something like in this um, exterior that appears as though he's not going to be talking about, politics or sexuality or religion.
Right.
That no, it's just this story about these orphans and Olaf coming after them and all these unfortunate events. And it's like, but then he's getting all of these little subtle messages out there to middle grade readers. And I'm
Yeah.
going, it's fine if you're open with your bias, but if you
Yeah.
pretend that you have no bias and then you just insert it in a fairly clever, subtle way, that just it feels unfair.
Yeah, and not only that, but it does also reflect poorly on, the point of view that you are representing, where because
Yes,
liberals are
thank you.
so frequently, criticized for, or that they are portrayed as hiding all these subliminal messages and everything. And,
Yeah,
liberals will often say, no, no, we don't do that. That's not a thing. And
right.
it's like you look at these books and it's like, um, and where
100%.
you're kind of playing right into, that argument.
That is my point. That is my
Yeah,
point. And I'm honestly not taking one side or the other. I just want to see a healthier discourse in general. And you are
right.
100% right, because the political left does get accused of doing that, of
Hmm.
hiding their real intentions
Yeah,
and then embedding those messages into various forms of media and trying to get that out there to the public, but denying the fact that they're doing it.
yeah,
Saying it's not there and it's obviously there. It's like
right.
that doesn't help.
Yeah.
um, and just a little aside with this, but with this, but for people who are listening or watching, they may not know this, but with my debut novel with Orphans of Liberty, like it's heavily focused on politics and political discourse and political issues, like contemporary issues in the United States. And the thing is, but it's so transparent that the book is about that,
Right.
that you're
Yeah.
not picking it up going, what? This is about politics. It's like it's so obvious that it's about that, and
Yeah.
it's so overt. And I'm not taking a political side. I've definitely offended people on the political right and left with the book. And so
Right.
I'm like, I don't know. Like, I guess I just offend everybody.
Yep. Which is a point of view that, certain people have taken up to say that's the only real way to do, you know, either commentary or comedy is by attacking both sides equally.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, yeah, and I think that it's fair for us to demand more from ideologues on both sides to
Yeah.
say that's unhealthy and that's unhealthy. That
Yes.
doesn't
Yeah.
even matter who I agree with. It's both sides are doing really unhealthy things, which just hurts everybody overall.
Hmm.
It's not even
Absolutely.
necessarily taking moderate positions. It's
Right.
it's saying you could have pretty, ideological positions, but still say we could talk about these things without, you know, um, you know, attributing false motives or intentions to the other side.
Hmm. All right, yeah, we should keep going because I know we've been bogged down in this one very good discussion, but
Yeah, but like I say, that's a lot of my notes with this anyway. So I feel like
Mhm.
we've covered other stuff.
Yeah,
This is a quick note in chapter 9. It's page 223. Then this is Esme and Olaf arguing because they're just having this little like squabble here, saying, and he's ultimately, it's Carmelita who's being a brat, and then Olaf essentially calls her a brat. I don't know if he actually calls her that. Yeah, but he says she's a spoiled baby. And he does call her a brat. I never wanted a brat like you around. Anyway, it's about time you're shown some discipline. But discipline is out, Esme said. I don't care what's out and what's in, Olaf cried. And I'm tired of having a girlfriend obsessed with fashion. All you do is sit around rooftop bathing salons while I run around doing all the work. If I hadn't been on the roof, Esme retorted, the sugar bowl would have been delivered to VFD. Besides, I was guarding. Never mind what you're doing, Olaf said. You're fired. You can't fire me, Esme growled. I quit. Well, you can leave by mutual agreement, Olaf grumbled. And so I'm like, did he just fire his girlfriend?
I think so.
From being his girlfriend? It's like, oh, I kind of like that language. That's kind of fun.
Yeah.
You're ready to break up with somebody, you give them a pink slip,
Right.
It's not you, we're having to make some cutbacks at this organization. I'm afraid we're going to have to streamline for the next, next like 4 quarters. Like over the next fiscal year, we're going to have to streamline our operations. And you didn't make the cut. I'm sorry. We're going to have to let you go. Is there a severance package? No.
Absolutely. And it is a nice callback to the mutual agreement, commentary earlier on in the book.
Yes.
But yeah, no, absolutely. It is a fun moment there.
Yeah, that's all that I have with chapter 9.
Okay. All right. So my first note is on page 206. I thought that you would really, really appreciate it at the toward the bottom of the page, where Count Olaf says, "And now you're in my clutches, ha!" And then Violet says, "We're not in your clutches," Violet said. "We just happen to be standing in the same room."
Thank you. I have said that multiple times.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, it actually came up.
Right. I'm so grateful that it came up because he's done this multiple times where it's just like, and they knew that it was all, he always ends a chapter like this when Olaf finally shows up and they're like, and then they knew that it was the end, for behind the desk was Olaf.
Yes.
Okay. So he's in the same room. That, like, trying to, that's such a middle grade thing to do, to end a chapter, and every chapter has to end all, powerfully and bomb, bomb, bomb. We're going to a commercial break.
Yes, absolutely. All right, hopping over to page 211, and this is, it comes up later as well, but this is the reference to the Baudelaire parents, that there's some sort of story about, Olaf says, "I guess the sub librarian hasn't told you the story about your parents," he said, "and a box of poisoned darts." And so later on, I think it's in chapter 13, on page 308, chapter 12, I think. Then this is when we find out that the weapon that caused Count Olaf to be an orphan is poison darts.
Yep. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. I figured that you would make note of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, because it is such an interesting detail to say that the Baudelaire parents, not only are they somewhat villainous by having this whole thing with poison darts, but that it actually is responsible for, Olaf's, treachery in some way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this is it's another example of denying us so much information and then asking us to jump to conclusions. And it just feels like, okay, that's still unfair, right? Going,
Right.
Oh, but then Olaf became an orphan because there's something to do with poison darts and your parents had poison darts. And it's just like the Baudelaires who are foolishly saying that they're responsible for Dewey's death.
Yeah.
And it's like that they murdered him. It's like, no, you didn't. Like, right. That's ridiculous. Like, you know what I mean? If you were like driving down the street because like, let's say like there's some serial killer who invades your home and you get into your car, get to the hospital and you don't know if you're going to make it, and then you hit somebody and they die, then like, okay, yes, it is manslaughter potentially, but you wouldn't even be charged with that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's just like, well, that doesn't make you guilty.
Right.
Like, yes, there was cause and effect, but that was, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like there's extenuating circumstances that do need to be factored in, and he's begging for us to make this, to come to this horrible conclusion, or at least have serious suspicions about their parents because poison darts, and then Olaf became an orphan because his parents got killed by poison darts, and then we're going. It's like, okay, I that doesn't mean anything. We need more evidence. We need far more context before we can make any kind of judgment whatsoever over
Yeah.
the guilt or innocence of their parents.
Yeah. We need to know whether or not there was intent.
Yes, whether there was intent, whether it was another one of those like they're struggling and oh no, blah blah blah, just like they were with the harpoon gun,
Yeah.
right? If it's the same kind of thing, then but he wants us to do that. He certainly wants middle grade readers to do that.
Yep. Yeah. All right. And yeah, so that is most of my notes, I think, as well. Because yeah, on page 216, this is when Justice Strauss questions why Violet gave Carmelita the harpoon gun. And then on page 221, oh yes, and 221 is just this, well, 220 into 221, so bottom of 220. Then you know all about the sugar bowl, Esme said, and what's inside. You know how important that thing was, and how many lives were lost in the quest to find it. You know how difficult it was to find a container that could hold it safely, securely, and attractively. You know what it means to the Baudelaires and what it means to the Snickets. Um, and yeah, and also the way that Esme is pointing at people, then it certainly seems like at one point she is giving somebody the middle finger,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a nice little touch. But yeah, just more, about how important the sugar bowl is, even though we still don't learn what's inside. Presumably never will.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Uh, right. And then on page 230, this is actually a really interesting moment to me. Um, yeah, which is just when the Baudelaires are telling Olaf that, he doesn't need to use the gun, the harpoon gun, and all that. And then this brief moment toward the bottom of 230, Klaus stared straight ahead at the bright red trigger that could press at any moment, and Sonny stared into Olaf's shiny, shiny eyes for even the smallest sign of nobility. What else can I do? The villain asked, so quietly the children could not be sure they had heard him correctly. And it's interesting because that is what the Baudelaires are constantly asking, that they're constantly saying is, oh, well, we had to do these things. What else could we have done? Um, and so it's interesting that Count Olaf in this moment is actually coming back to that same question of what else can I do, as if he's trapped.
Yes, it's absolutely a moment where he gets humanized to some degree, and it seems like he is a victim of circumstances, and he ultimately doesn't want to be villainous, and there's a lot more going on with him than what we actually see. The problem for me is that he is just so cartoonish most of the time that to then try to portray him in this really compassionate light, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's fair, and that's why I say that it's an interesting moment because it doesn't. It's so hard to agree with this humanizing of Count Olaf that we don't
Yeah,
have enough information. Why does he feel compelled to do this?
exactly.
All of that. Um, yeah. So anyway, it's an interesting moment, and I don't have much else to say about it because I'm just like, I don't know what to make of it.
Right. It's sort of like you hear this especially with um, within the movie industry. Then like some critics and fans will talk about a film, and typically it's like a B movie when they're talking about it, and something that's really not meant to be brilliant and profound and award winning and any of that stuff, but just, like just it's a B level film, right? Then people will defend it and they'll say it knows what it is, right? Like it's
Right.
not trying to make any deep insight into the human experience. It's not trying to get into any deep philosophical, profound ideas or, give complex views on philosophy, ideology, metaphysics, or whatever. It's just like it knows what it is. It's trying to make you laugh, or it's trying to like scare you, or it's just a swooning romance, or whatever. Like it's just it knows what it is. And there's so many times in these books where I feel like Handler doesn't know what these books are. It's
Yeah.
like he wants them to be deeper at times, but then he can't help himself by then having 98% of them be absurdist fiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
No, I
I
agree.
just,
I,
yeah,
I wonder how much of that is, based on feedback of, like, well, you can't make them, completely absurdist, that you need to have some, quiet moments in there. And there are legitimately some that do work.
there are some
Um,
that work. Yeah.
but yeah, I think it, it, I could see, there being, that discussion of, his editor or publisher telling him like, you need to put a few more moments of profundity in there,
Right.
just to balance out all the absurdity, and it doesn't work.
No, I just don't
So,
think that it works. I mean, I've never read the Captain Underpants books, but I know that you have. Like, did they ever
yes.
try to get into like the spiritual condition of human beings?
Yeah.
Right. And like
Not
I've
as
read,
far as I've
yeah,
read.
I've read some of like other stuff, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I've read a number of those books, and Big Nate, a number of those. And it's like they know what they are,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that's the frustrating thing. Like even like growing up, I read a lot of Hardy Boys. They know what they are,
Hmm.
right? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
And, it's just like, ooh, we better not touch religion because we can't possibly deal with that. We better not
Right.
touch politics because we can't possibly deal with that in these books, and it's probably not
Yeah.
our role. Like
Yeah.
I'm saying like the entire like editors and the writer and marketing, all of that stuff.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so those were my notes for chapter 9, and I only had the one note for chapter 10, which was just about it being Lemony Snicket driving the taxi cab.
Okay.
And
Um,
he does have the sugar bowl um, in the taxi cab with him.
right. Um, all right. I've only got one note with chapter 10 as well. So this is on page 253. Um, and the last couple sentences of that big paragraph, it says this is where all of the hotel guests have descended down to the lobby to see what's going on because Dewey gets murdered and it's this whole commotion. And then he says, it is always interesting to observe what people are wearing in the middle of the night, although there are more pleasant ways to make such observations without being accused of murder. I, I what? I've just got a giant question mark with an exclamation mark. What the hell is he talking about?
No idea.
I honestly I'm so baffled by that. Is he talking about like, because it doesn't seem like seducing somebody, because presumably if that's if that's the more pleasant way of observing, wouldn't they not be wearing anything in the middle of the night?
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
And
because
then
it's,
go ahead.
to observe what people are wearing in the middle of the night, not like what they do wear in the middle of the night, but what they are wearing. So
Yeah,
you're stepping right into the middle of the night
that's what I'm
when you are
saying.
observing them.
The only way I can interpret this is he's talking about creeping into people's rooms or looking in people's windows, like being a complete peeping Tom,
Right.
of spying on people in their most private, intimate moment and calling that pleasant.
Right.
It seems really creepy. I don't know how to interpret that in a way that is not super creepy.
Yeah, I didn't even like really pick up on it, but now that you've pointed it out, then I'm just like, yeah, I don't have another reading of that.
No, I don't know what another reading could be. Let me just read it one more time. It is always interesting to observe what people are wearing in the middle of the night. Okay, it's always interesting. He's always been into this, apparently.
Mhm.
Okay. Although there are more pleasant ways to make such observations without being accused of murder. Like, are you talking about like spy cams or like this like Norman Bates from Psycho, a little hole in the wall, and you like put your face in there, and like,
Yeah.
how is this not a creepy statement to make?
I mean, I suppose you could just knock on the door and see, what they're wearing when they answer it.
I guess. I guess it's still pretty creepy, right?
Yeah.
Because what people wear to bed, that's an intimate thing. Like even like if they're not, like even if they're wearing proper pajamas or whatever nightwear, like that's still something that you would not want people to ordinarily see.
Right. Yep.
Just
Um,
more creepy little things that randomly get interjected into the book.
yeah. And on the note of creepiness, I should also point out that since we have determined that it must be Lemony Snicket who is driving that taxi cab, he has a woman who he is keeping in the trunk. Um,
Ah, yeah.
so it's interesting because as I kind of looked into it a little bit before we started recording, and it seems like it's supposed to be the Duchess of Winnipeg, who has been referenced many times as having that
Right.
masquerade ball and all that.
Right.
But I'm not sure, exactly why she was, being kept in the trunk. And I don't remember how he describes it. I think that he says that he is hiding her in the trunk. Um,
Right.
but yeah, hiding her of her own volition or, you know. Anyway.
I hear you. I hear you. Snicket, at the very least, is a super creep.
Yes.
Whether you want to then continue it on and then say handler, because I'm not saying it's handler,
Yeah,
but I absolutely am saying that Snicket, as the narrator and the character within this story universe, is super creepy.
absolutely. All right, do you want to keep going on with your notes for chapter 11?
Sure. So we've already talked about the reference to Justice Scalia and the issues going on with that. My next one is on page 272, and this is in like towards the bottom of the page, and it says like really close to the bottom. And someone bumped into Sunny's head, assumed she was an ornamental vase, and tried to place an umbrella in her mouth. And because they're all blindfolded, right, and except for the Baudelaires, and I just wrote down, that's what they're for, because we talked about this last week with ornamental
Oh,
vases. And I was going,
yeah.
what are those giant oversized vases
Right.
for? I don't understand. Like, people usually just put sticks in them. And I'm like, because
Yeah.
if you put flowers, they would just disappear. They just drop down to the bottom because nobody's got like 4 foot tall flowers. At least, like, I don't know. I guess you could put like a sunflower in there.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
No, but that's a good note there. Because yeah, like I thought that it was just a funny image. But yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And in not in modern day would that really be a thing, but I feel like that certainly would be in, 19th century, um, or so. And in London specifically,
why
where
do you
they get
think?
a lot of rain.
Why do you think it wouldn't be a thing anymore?
I don't know. I guess just because I haven't encountered that at all, that I'm just like, I don't know. Is that a
No,
thing?
I do know what you mean because there's a lot of stuff like that, like in the Victorian period. Then I think many families, if not most families, would have a hat rack. Do you
Right.
know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
you see this in older films. Then
Yeah.
people just walk into a room, they walk in, and there's just a hat rack, and
Yeah.
it's like because men in particular just when they would go outside, they would wear a hat, and then you would, of course, take it off when you come indoors.
Yeah.
I do kind of know what you mean, that there is some furniture that we just don't really use as much anymore. But yeah, I don't know. I just thought it was a funny little thing of going, oh, okay, because he was unsure. Like, it's, too big for flowers and it's too small for hiding a person in. And then I'm like, umbrellas. Sure, okay.
Right.
Seems dangerous though, right? Because if you like try to pull out the umbrella, but you don't pull it fully out, then it's going to like grab the other side of the giant vase and it'll tip over. Do you know what I mean?
All right. Yeah. What other notes did you have for this chapter then?
We've talked about this already on page 279, comparing themselves to Olaf in the trial and whether they're guilty or not in comparison to him, which is problematic, let's say. Page 283, this is my last note for it. And then I've only got one other note for the entire book. Then right in the middle of this big long list on page 283, then presumably this is the rabbi, I guess, who then says, I submit these Talmudic commentaries. Because the Talmud is, like rabbinical for like it's the interpretations of the Torah and parts of the Torah and commentary and stuff like that a rabbi would study. So, but I love the fact that you brought up before that the rabbi in this hotel doesn't even know how to read Hebrew, doesn't even know which direction it goes in. So I feel like he's just getting rid of them. He's just like, I don't know what these are for. I submit.
Yeah. I found a secret code in here, so here you go.
Right.
It's not at all religious. That's
right. Exactly.
Yeah, that even though it is something that seems like it would be, oh, well, see, that's religious, and it's like, no, it isn't.
Yeah, exactly. Even that's
got
like,
enough
no,
evidence that we know that it's not.
Right. So that was it.
Okay. All right. I had a couple additional notes on page 275. This is when Justice Strauss starts off the trial. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, she said, her voice coming from right in front of the Baudelaires, and anyone else who happens to be in attendance. So, there are a few different things that she could mean by that. It could be an inclusive way, for people who don't identify as either male or female. But I think that one of the other ways that it can be read is a lady and a gentleman are those who are proper.
Agreed.
As then anyone else would be the villainous people who are also there.
Agreed. I think that's really it, especially because Snicket has said pretty offensive things over people who are non-binary.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be much respect. Now, maybe Justice Strauss has respect for that.
Right.
But I feel like it's, ladies and gentlemen, you are right that is a, be a lady, be a gentleman, that is not just, that's not your gender in and of itself, it's your behavior as well. And it also typically does not include children.
Right. Yes. Yeah. So that was that note there. Page 287, very bottom of the page. Then one of the Baudelaire parents, says, "It is not your day in court." And I just think, oh, yeah, because now is their day in court. Everybody has their day in court. And it's interesting that he didn't actually go fully into that and, outright say, but now it was the Baudelaire's day in court.
Right.
So I appreciate that he didn't go into detail on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that reminds me, I don't have a note for it, but almost at the very end of the book, then when they're flying off of the building and they're in this boat, then Olaf says, we're in the same boat now. Right. And that's an expression. But he doesn't, again, Snicket does not then say, this is an expression which ordinarily means this, but now it literally and figuratively means, like, he doesn't do that. There's a presumption, at least, that readers will get it, or if they don't get it, then it's not a big deal if they don't get it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, next up is on page 289, when Sonny says Bildungsroman.
Bildungsroman.
Okay.
Roman. Yeah.
Thank you. And I was not familiar with this word, so I looked it up. I was
We've
like, that
talked
kind of
about
looks
it.
like. I'm sorry.
I've specifically said these books are a type of Bildungsroman.
Oh, okay. My apologies that I didn't. Yeah, I guess like I remember you saying it, but like because I didn't read it that way, then I didn't make the
Right.
full connection there.
Right. Okay.
Um, but yeah, a novel dealing with one person's formative years or spiritual education. So it is interesting that it is also spiritual education, which is, absent.
Historically, that's what they've been. Now, Bildungsroman typically just is a catch-all term for a coming-of-age story.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But
Um,
historically, though, then it has been more traditionally than it is learning morality and spirituality as you age.
mhm.
And now, like, it'll be like a Bildungsroman of like entering the dating world. You know what I
Right.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah, and those were my only notes for chapter 11.
Okay. Um, trying to think. I think this one is in chapter 12. I'm pretty sure because I've only got one note and then I'm done. Oh, it might actually be in chapter. It is in chapter 13. So you go ahead with chapter 12.
Okay. Um, yeah, we have the reference at the very beginning of the chapter on page 295, as we had alluded to in our intro, of the finger of the woman with hair but no beard. Uh, Her finger had been broken long ago in a dispute over a game of backgammon. So we're coming back to this, like, this is now the third or fourth reference to backgammon in this one book, and it makes it less and less relevant each time. Where, before then we were like, oh, was Lemony Snicket like, spying on the Baudelaires, like that he was hiding there when the
Right.
Baudelaire parents were playing backgammon? And now then it's like, oh, and there was a dispute with, over a game of backgammon. So it seems like maybe backgammon has some additional meaning for the organization.
Right.
Uh, and that, it just means that Lemony Snicket may not have actually been spying on the Baudelaires then.
Right.
All right, so next on page 305. Yes, this is where. So Justice Strauss is talking about, the two other members of the High Court. And Violet says, toward the top of the page, actually, Justice Strauss, Violet said, your fellow judges on the High Court are associates of Count Olaf. Those villains will never put Olaf in jail. It can't be, Justice Strauss gasped. I've known them for years. I've told them everything that was happening to you children, and they were always very interested. Of course they were interested, you fool, Count Olaf said. They passed along all that information to me so I could catch up with the orphans. You've been helping me all along without even knowing it. Ha! And this is just another example of explaining away, what the uh, inconsistencies that we have talked about before, where it's like, how does Olaf know where they're getting to? That in addition to the other one where it's, we're not in your clutches, we're just in the same room. And I'm like, it feels like this is just answering Nathan's, or responding to Nathan's criticisms.
Yep. Yep.
All right, and on page 306, the bottom of that first paragraph there, it's the unraveling of my story. This is Olaf speaking, or as the French say, the noblesse oblige. Um, do you have any major insights into that phrase and its
No.
usage?
No.
Okay, I looked it up, and it says the inferred responsibility of privileged people to act with generosity and nobility toward those less privileged.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so that is an interesting reference since we have all these discussions of nobility and obviously the Baudelaires being, privilege from birth, and that presumably the Baudelaire parents as well should be acting, you know, with some level of generosity and nobility toward potentially Count Olaf, who became an orphan thanks to them.
Right.
So yeah, just a really, yeah, I don't know, quite a connection there, quite a phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a good point. I don't have much to add with that because I think you've essentially said the significance of it.
Mhm. Um, all right, and uh, yeah, and on the opposing page 307, then this is where Klaus, agrees to work with to help out Count Olaf. And then on 314, then we get more of that with Violet deciding to help him. Um, and both times, then they do sort of have this mindset of, well, it doesn't really matter if we help him because we'll also be helping out ourselves, or because
Hmm.
this ultimately won't really help him.
Hmm.
Um, and but it is interesting that they are justifying these despicable acts to themselves. And so it's easy to see how, someone like Olaf could have, gotten onto this path.
I suppose I feel like it's just there's this sense of him trying to complicate the morality of it is it still feels like an unfair discussion of it,
Mm,
um, because that doesn't lead to what Olaf is doing. I guess I'm saying the idea that you can. I take issue with the idea that you can live a morally uncompromised life.
right.
I don't see how any person can do that. I mean, if you have any guilt whatsoever about, let's say, for instance, climate change, the absolute best thing that you can do is to kill yourself. Like, does that, no, like, I'm telling you 100%. Like, that is ethically, like, if you're going to say the preservation of the planet is of utmost importance,
Yeah.
then in order to have, you know, like even if you want to say that you've got a positive, like or whatever it would be, a negative carbon footprint, right?
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
what I'm trying to think of which way it goes, right? But
Yeah.
like that, you know what I mean? That you are essentially capturing more carbon than releasing through your entire life,
Hmm.
then okay, fine. Even if that's the case, like that, let's say you've planted more trees than you are possibly contributing through travel of using fossil fuels and all of this stuff. It's like, yeah, but there's everything else that if you're using power, electricity, um, at any point, if you ever benefit from it, then are you not like, are you sure that you know exactly where this is all coming from in the electrical grid? Because some of it's going to be coming from coal powered plants. Like,
Hmm. Yeah.
some of it's going to be coming from nuclear power. So if you have
Yeah.
issues with that, then what are you going to do? What about all the natural resources, the finite resources in cell phones of these rare
Right.
earth minerals, and what that does to the conflict in Central Africa? That
Hmm.
you are contributing in some small way to the exploitation of people around the world, the destruction of the planet. And so ultimately, this idea that you can live a morally uncompromised life to me is absurd. I'm not saying that we shouldn't strive for morality, but he seems to be setting up this idea of you can be perfect, and I'm saying you can't
Right.
you cannot get through this life without saying, yes, that part is disappointing and I don't like that, but I'm making the best decisions that I have with the resources available to me. I'm trying to contribute the most good to the world, understanding that there is going to be some stuff that I participate in that maybe is not completely free of a moral quandary,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That like it's as simple as that. So this whole thing of like, oh, now we're like Olaf, and I'm like, as opposed to what? Because like their idea before, when they're like, oh well, we can't execute him, like, because that would make us evil like him, because then we'd be murderers like him. And it's like, you can't make the distinction between an execution and a murder. Like,
Right.
this is ridiculous that more people will die, and more people have died because they did not take the opportunity to kill him when they could have.
Mm.
I'm going, like, even if you feel like that compromises you morally, then there is a certain amount of looking at the greater good.
Yeah. Yeah. For
And
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No. I think that is. Yeah. Totally valid.
Right. And
Uh,
that's where I just it just it's such a facile understanding of morality
mm,
that it's tiring.
right. All right. Well, those were my only notes for chapter 12.
Okay. I've got one note in chapter 13, and this is on page 324, and it's really just about book burnings. And I just thought it was a good description of it, where he says the burning of a book this is the middle of the page on 324. The burning of a book is a sad, sad sight, for even though a book is nothing but ink and paper, it feels as if the ideas contained in the book are disappearing as the pages turn to ashes, and the cover and binding, which is the term for the stitching and glue that holds the pages together, blacken and curl as the flames do their wicked work. When someone is burning a book, they are showing utter contempt for all of the thinking that produced its ideas, all of the labor that went into its words and sentences, and all of the trouble that befell the author. And then he continues on in his absurd little, um, backstory here.
Yeah.
But uh, I just think it's a good description of it, of why book burnings are, um, I don't know, for lack of a better word, unfortunate, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
why they're ultimately pretty disturbing. Even if you like, I mean, I guess like to some degree you could say, if the ideas within a book are so vile and potentially destructive, okay. But I mean, if it would be hard to justify that at all. I mean, even something like awful, if you look at, like, because a good example of this would be like the consideration of Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler, of saying, well, should that book still exist? And it's like, well, yeah, because for historians and just for a general understanding of how a political leader can use rhetoric and scapegoat a particular group of people when an entire country is economically struggling and recovering, like just suffering from the Treaty of Versailles and all of that, of how exactly they can rile up a group of people to then scapegoat a particular group of people to dehumanize them, to understand what happened.
Right.
Like, and
Yeah.
at the risk that some people might read that and agree with the ideas is worth the risk of, in comparison to the benefits that we get from understanding vile, reprehensible ideas. And if you find the ideas so vile and reprehensible and you don't see any value in them, then just please don't read the book. But
Right.
you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, I don't want to read it. Like, there's like true crime. I love horror. I don't like true crime. True crime
Hmm.
I find truly upsetting. It's far too disturbing for me to read about things, or even true crime podcasts and things like that. I have no issue if somebody enjoys that. And in fact, I am desperately grateful for the fact that we have criminal profilers who
Hmm. Yeah.
understand the criminal mind and go deep into that world, because we have to understand how it works
Yeah.
in order
Yeah.
to prevent
Absolutely.
it. So I'm looking at this and going, like, it's a really good defense of it, because even when I'm going like, oh, I've got issues with this and I have issues with this, and I'm like, I have no issues with the books existing.
Right.
It's just
Yeah.
and I have no issue with people reading them. I think that, and with and whenever you publish something, then I think the way that you can like burn a book is by taking a critical eye to it, which is so
Mhm.
much more effective than just burning
Right.
it.
Yeah.
Right? To destroy the ideas with more ideas, rather than to destroy them by suppressing them.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I did have the same passage marked. I didn't have as much to say, but that yeah, that was really well said. I do have, I think, yeah, three additional notes for this chapter. The first is on page 337, um, which is where you get the wordplay with each story had its story, and each story's story was unfathomable in the Baudelaire orphans' short journey, and many of the stories are unfathomable to me, even after all these lonely years and all this lonely research. Um, I appreciate good wordplay, but I also, you know, I believe it is the proper Canadian way to spell it with an E if you're referring to a building, like the story of a building. Um, so it's just it throws me off a little bit where I'm like, yeah, like this is something that works in, American English that doesn't really work
Yes,
for
agreed.
like in British English.
Agreed. Yes, because I'm pretty sure that it does have an E in Canadian spelling.
Yeah. So I'm like, at least you finally used that wordplay, but at the same time, I'm like, eh.
Right.
All right, and next note is on page 349. This is just when, Sonny bites the hand of of Justice Strauss, and I love the description of it. Goodbye, she said, and the Baudelaire opened her mouth and bit the hand of justice.
Right. Right.
I'm just like that. That just sounds so great.
Yeah, no, that
The
that
hand
is
of
good.
justice.
Yeah.
And initially, then like I kind of skipped over it, and then it was like, wait, that wasn't a capitalized J or anything. That's
Right.
literally
Right.
just the hand of justice.
Right.
Um, yeah, but also that is, quite literally leaving a woman to die on the roof of this building, which is the most reprehensible thing that the children have done thus far. Because like she rode all the way up with them, and I know that it was partly her choice that they did give her the opportunity to hop on board the ship with them, but for them to have like just been like, all right, you won't come with us, well then stay there on the roof, even though the building is already kind of shaking, and you will presumably die from the fire, but then it doesn't even happen that way where she tumbles all the way down to the ground.
Yeah.
So,
No, I agree. I mean, I guess you could say that. I guess part of it is I feel like Justice Strauss is the adult here.
mm, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like we are. I don't really see this of her being a complete victim in this. Um,
Right.
and same thing with all the people in the hotel who refuse to
Oh
take off their
yeah.
blindfolds and all of this stuff, right? Like, and I mean,
The
I hate
judge isn't even around. They're not going to know if you take off your blindfold.
yeah, I I'll tell you afterwards because there was a news story not all that long ago of a person who did something so unfathomably stupid, to use this unfathomable word, right? So unfathomably stupid, and died in the process that there's very little sympathy. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes
Yeah,
when
yeah.
somebody does something just so incredibly reckless, where it's like you must know that this is an awful idea,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah,
that
you
and
feel bad for the family,
absolutely for the
but not
family.
really for the person.
No, because there's a certain amount. And so I'm saying, even in the real world, I go, our compassion struggles. I know that I should be more compassionate, even when a person does something where it's just like, that was your own fault. What else did you think was going to happen?
Right.
How else did you see this playing
Yeah.
out in your head? But but I'm saying in the fictional world of just pure fiction with these characters, I'm going, I'm not even a little sad.
Mhm.
Because this is
Gotcha.
just
Yeah,
your
yeah.
own fault for like, yeah.
For just not hopping in the boat, and then you can hop off immediately, once the boat lands in the water.
I'm saying Strauss, but even more like the people in the building with like the
Oh, yeah,
blindfolds
yeah.
and
Yeah,
all of
for
that. I'm
sure.
going them like Justice Strauss. I'm like yeah, but everybody else, I'm like I don't know how much sympathy to have for that kind of stupidity.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and it's very unclear as to how many of them actually perished. Um, but I like to think that all of VFD went up in flames, because just the world is better without them.
They're useless.
Yeah. Um, all right. So I did have one more note here, and this is hopping back to page 335, um, which is toward the middle of the page. This is when the children are going up the elevator. They saw Geraldine Julienne, who was using her microphone the way some blind people use a cane, and they saw Charles and Sir, who were holding hands so as not to lose one another. And we had, kind of referenced another moment between Charles and Sir when we were not recording. Getting back to the discussion that we had in The Miserable Mill, where they are described as partners, and it's like,
Mm-hmm.
well, what does Handler, or Lemony Snicket mean by that? And then on page 338, then at the top of the page, it says, perhaps Charles and Sir are no longer partners, and you have had the occasion to study one of them as he sat across from you on a bus. And that to me sounds like, maybe they split up, which would be the, healthy thing to do in that relationship.
Uh-huh.
And then, maybe you're looking at you're on the bus with Charles or Sir, and you're looking at them and you're going, "Ooh, aren't they attractive?" That's the way that I read it, and I'm just like, all right, as you had mentioned before, it's not overt enough to be. Um, uh, uh, what was your word for it before? Where you're just like, it doesn't feel like it's actually controversial at all or
Right.
controversial enough based on that
Yes.
language.
Yeah, based off of that language, then I think essentially the way I explained it before, I have the attitude of say what you're thinking. Just say what you want to say.
Right,
Like, you just need one word in there. Just romantic partners. There you
right.
go.
Yeah,
Like, and uh, I mean, I can't, no matter how, um, even if you grow up in like, if you are growing up in an incredibly um, conservative religious household, I doubt that your parents would let you read these books anyway.
hmm
Um, so I don't know who you're trying to protect in that case. But even if
yeah,
you've grown up in a conservative religious household, then you still know that some people are gay.
right. Yeah.
Like, I just don't get it. I don't know why he has to use this veiled description where discerning readers will go, "Oh, that kind of partners." Just say romantic partners.
Yeah, I think that part of it may be, a little bit of uh, kind of retconning the previous book where, he would have had people who were asking, when you say partners, when you're referring to Sir and Charles, do you mean romantic partners or business partners? And he went,
Right.
oh, that's a really interesting idea. And so then
Mm.
he might have gone further into it in this book.
It's definitely further in this book because they're
Yeah,
in the same hotel room for one thing, and they
yeah,
hold hands.
yeah.
So it seems to be a little bit more it's definitely more overt here.
hmm
Um, and yeah, like I, I guess I just wish that it was overt, like
Right.
completely overt, completely transparent of what this is, without being like while still being age appropriate, right?
hmm
Like you
Yeah,
don't need to get into any kind of discussion of like
yeah.
anything beyond the
You,
fact that just they're romantic partners.
yeah, you don't even need to, say that they kiss or anything like that. Having
No,
them
that's what I'm
hold
saying.
hands, that's fine. That's,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely, say romantic partners.
Yeah, I guess I just don't like how he keeps it vague like
Mhm.
that. I feel like it would actually be less controversial if it was overt, right?
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
don't you feel like that's where people get really upset when they find out afterwards? Like, with
Yeah.
some,
Yeah.
like, I mean, like certainly with J.K. Rowling,
Mhm.
then people feel that way about Dumbledore. It's like, wait, if you in your head he was gay all along, why the hell didn't you just say it? Why are you saying it now after the fact?
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's that it's fine. Okay, so he's gay, and you say, well, it's not relevant to the plot. If it's not relevant to the plot, then why are you telling us after the fact?
Right.
If it's just completely irrelevant, then why mention it at all? And if it is relevant, then why not include it in your books? But that's how it feels. It feels, um, toothless. Like, actually have a little bit of, uh, I don't know, strength to say, I might get attacked for this, but at least it's going to be obvious what it is. But instead, what happens is then if you hide it too much, if it's too disguised, and then it kind of becomes more apparent later on, I think you get it more controversial, because then parents can make a decision whether they want their kids to read a book that has gay characters or not. And if certain parents don't want their kids to read a book featuring LGBTQ characters, then it's like you can say, well, that's wrong and they shouldn't do this, and whatever. You can like have whatever judgment on those parents, but at least they're making an informed decision. But I don't like it when it feels like it's an uninformed decision and it's coded and veiled. That's where I feel like you really get into trouble.
Mm-hmm. Yep, no, I agree.
Yeah, it'd be the same thing if it was a religious book. It's like, don't write a book that's going to ultimately have like Jesus be the savior, but then say like it's a completely secular book. There's no discussion of religion, and then it's like secretly inside, it's like, kids, please go look up, like John 3:16. For God so loved, like you know what I mean? If you like started including all these, like, please go look this up and look this up and look this up, then I'd be like, that's not fair either.
Right. Yep. No, I agree entirely. All right. Well, those were my only notes for chapter 13.
Okay. Can we? I realized that this did not get resolved. At least maybe I missed something. I don't know. But if you go back to, let's say, page 75 with I forget again what they're called, triptychs or something like that. I don't know what they're called. Is that the name? I feel like it's triptych.
I think it is, yeah.
So you've got the 3 different pictures there and not a chapter, and then we get it again in not a chapter after chapter 7, I think. And did we ever get any explanation of what this is?
Nope. None whatsoever. I think that it is just it is interesting that it is slightly different the second time that it appears. One of the images is, just the order has been changed.
What page is that?
I'm trying to find it.
I know it doesn't have a page number at the bottom.
Yeah. No, but I don't actually know where it is, but
I'm pretty sure it's after chapter 7. I'll find it.
Okay.
I didn't look at the 2 of them, so I'm not. Maybe it's not after 7. Okay, maybe it's after 6. Yeah, it is.
Yes.
Page 149.
149.
Yeah, so it then has the guy pushing the button with the top hat as the first one, and then the woman drilling into the wall, and then the eyeball looking through a hole, seeing the frayed cable of the elevator. Presumably, that's what we're looking at here. And she does have a mustache on the floor, so I guess that's the same person.
Yeah. I see.
There's a top hat and a mustache.
And
then you see the guy, he's got his top hat and the mustache, and he's wearing this big coat. And I wonder if like she hid the coat in that vase.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's the same person, somebody in disguise, but I don't know who. I don't know what that's supposed to be referring to.
Yeah. No, that is that's really it is an odd inclusion, and I think it is as we had talked about when we first encountered it, that it's just sort of to be like, you can read this story in a different order, and it may adjust the meaning slightly, but overall it's still the same story. Because certainly you don't get the sense that it is the same person on page 75. At least I didn't when I first looked at it.
No.
Because why would they be using the elevator after they have checked the...
No idea.
So, yeah.
You are right that the one on 149 makes more sense. That the person's in disguise, uses the elevator, then drills in, and then there's the frayed cord or cable.
As that if does not making or making sure that nobody can follow them.
Right. Yeah. I'm gonna think more on that, but I don't know what's going on with that. And I was curious if that made more sense to you than it did to me, because I'm like, well, I got to the end of the book, and I'm like, wait a minute, what about this whole elevator and the frayed cable and this person in disguise who's done something to the elevator? And then it
Yeah.
was just like, oh,
Yeah, and it's so interesting because it's not talked about at all. Like the images just
no,
exist.
there's no
Uh,
commentary on them.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. Well, I guess we'll finish with that.
yep. And then we will be moving on to the first four chapters of The End.
Ooh,
That is the
the end.
title of the next book. It no longer has that
Alliteration.
yes, yeah, thank you. Um yeah, and yeah, I'm looking forward to reading it and oh, wait, Nathan, um oh, I had forgotten about this. There's actually a chapter 14. Like
Uh,
it's
hmm.
it's it's the last book. That 13 isn't the last book, but there's a 14th book.
Okay. Um, yeah, I don't know what we're going to do to resolve this then. We already made the commitment of 39 videos,
Right.
but 13 books with 13 chapters in each one. So
Hmm.
now we've got a conundrum.
Oh dear. We'll have to think on it, and I guess the beginning of next episode, we'll let people know what the plan will be for reading
Yeah,
it.
that sounds good. Yeah, we'll think on it and decide by then. All right, folks. Well, feel free to comment below on any of the stuff that we talked about and make sure that you do the readings, chapters 1 to 4, with the end for next week. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
Hey.
Ignore the tattoo! A phrase here which means like, comment, subscribe, and share this podcast across the web. That may seem like a strange definition, but in this context, it is entirely accurate.